Hello there, this is Antonia and I have one question for you. How do you feel about being comfortable working with fonts after watching only one video? Honestly, it's not a trick question. I bet you will feel that way after you watch this video. I will not bore you with the history of fonts, but if you would like to know more, I will later share resources which I recommend to check after you watch this video. First things first, let's talk about and clarify terminology. We use term fonts, but in reality we actually want to say typefaces. Serious typographers might even say that you're a noob or ignorant because a font is for a typeface, like MP3 is for a song. You will certainly not say, "Ooh, I really like that MP3," will you? Fonts means styles of a typeface, and typeface is a family of fonts. Here's an example. Helvetica is a typeface, but Helvetica Light, Regular, or Bold are in fact fonts. There are many different typefaces. However, we have two main groups. Those are serif and sans serif fonts. It doesn't stop here. Those two further have numerous styles. Serifs have old style, transitional, neoclassical, slab, calendron, and glyphic. And serifs have grotesque, I hope I'm saying this right, square, humanistic, and geometric styles. Even though we have so much to choose from, they all have one thing in common: their anatomy. So let's check it out. X height refers to the height of the lowercase x for a typeface. Serif, these are the extra strokes on the ends of letters, hence the name. Baseline, this is the line upon which most letters sit and below which the senders extend. There is actually a lot more, but I don't want to snooze you, so I will leave it up to you to Google other parts yourself. Here's the rest of the list. Okay, now we have a lot more knowledge, so let's see how to choose and combine fonts. The content should influence what fonts you decide for. If you have, for example, a web app, let's say some sort of dashboard, then you want to keep the amount of different typefaces to a minimum. I personally wouldn't recommend going above 2, in some special cases 3, and every website has headings and body text. In our dashboard we have the same, so you can pick a nice legible typeface for headings and another for body text. It's very common to have a custom typeface for headings, but Platform's native font for body text. I will explain native fonts a little bit later, but for macOS that would be San Francisco. San Francisco is already installed on all Apple devices, and using it gives more unity with the operating system. Your users are already used to a native font to their operating system, so it will not be weird to see it on your website or an app. It will feel more at home. Let's take an example. Notion uses this rule, and whether you use it as a standalone app or through your browser, it feels like a native app you have on your system. So good job, Notion. On the other hand, marketing websites can go a little bit crazy and have different typefaces. But I noticed that companies with deep pockets like to have only one custom-made, tailored for them typeface. In the end, I would recommend not to go overboard. More different styles you have, it's more exhausting and less predictable for your user to follow your content. And you also risk potential bad combinations of fonts, and nobody wants that, right? If we take Figma's website, we'll see that they use only one typeface. It's their custom typeface. They paid somebody to craft it. Even though we see one typeface, they make clear separation of headings and body text through different sizes. It's really useful to research popular apps or websites and inspect their typefaces. You can simplify this process with many tools, and here is one. What font? It's a Chrome extension and it quickly shows fonts on any website. Often overlooked knowledge by designers is knowing how one can use all of these fonts in their web or mobile app. Computers don't have all fonts ever made installed, and if you don't have a font used by a website, you will not see it. Website will use whatever else you actually have installed. In fact, a developer can decide which backup font that you 100% have installed will be used instead. There is a set of so-called web-safe fonts installed on every operating system. This is why they are called web-safe. They exist everywhere and they are used as a fail-safe in most cases, if for some reason you can't see a custom font. So, how do we use some custom fonts on our website? There are two ways of importing them. Easy method is using a link to a font repository somewhere on the internet. A good example is Google Fonts website. They host a bazillion of fonts and you can hook any font from there by using just a tiny little bit of code they so generously display to you when you choose your font. That way, when somebody opens your website, they will trigger a font download and it will render on your web. Sounds too easy to be true? Well, yes, in fact, I wouldn't recommend this solution because what happens if there is a glitch in the internet connection? You can guess it, yep, the website then uses fail-safe fonts. We don't want that, so here's another method. You can download font files and put them on your server. That way, they will load faster and work as long as your website works, basically. I mentioned Google Fonts. That's an awesome resource for free fonts and it's loved by designers and developers alike. It was never so easy to spice up your website with custom fonts. That's not only, of course, place to find fonts. For example, Adobe has Adobe Fonts. It's a paid service, Adobe, of course, and they don't allow you to host font files yourself, but that's another story. When it comes to mobile apps, it is custom to download font files and then hook them in your interface via code. Something developer will handle, you don't have to worry about that. I mentioned this topic in the previous section, so now it's time to expand. We already know that in order to use fonts, you need to have it installed, or your website needs to have a link to a repository where the font you want lives. Operating systems come with web-safe fonts. Here is a list of those, for your convenience. I also mentioned San Francisco. This is not a web-safe font, but it is a native font for macOS or Apple. It is not available on Windows or Linux. They have different native fonts and developers can use only one line of code to tell the browser, hey, use whatever is a default native font on the user's operating system. I always recommend this option for body text unless you have tailor-made expensive font for your website or an app. I would say in most cases, mobile apps use a native font because unity with the rest of the operating system is even more important here. As you might already notice, there are free and paid fonts. Google and Adobe fonts are not the only places on the internet to get fonts. There are a lot of type foundries that make fonts and sell them, as well as other marketplaces. Typically, these places offer licenses for desktop usage, then price per website visits using their font in mobile apps and other variations of this. Fonts can be super extra expensive, so prepare for the cost if some nice typeface grabs your attention. Let's check Noe Machina. It's a nice looking font, right? Even some base setup will be several thousands of dollars. Typefaces are so crucial in our everyday life, both real and online, that it's not surprising they're highly valued. I bet some of you are thinking right now, I should be a type designer. And honestly, it's an awesome field. It's hard, but everything is hard. If you want to explore how to make fonts, check these apps. Alright, at this point we learned a lot about typefaces, or if you prefer fonts, but now the question is, how do we use them in designs? And disclaimer, what I'm teaching here does not apply for graphic designers. This is for UI or product designers that make apps and websites. So, do we just install a font and use random font sizes in our design? Absolutely not. This topic will digress a bit into the design systems that you surely heard of, but worry not. I will make it very simple. You will notice that sizes of the font repeat throughout the interface. You don't believe me? Well, let's check Figma's website. It seems that they have defined sizes for different purposes. Headings use one set of properties and body text uses something else. These decisions are not random. Product designers use something called modular scale to define sizes and other properties of a font using a little bit of math. These sizes are not arbitrary, they have equal jumps in sizes, that's the key. That way, a whole team of designers have a way to design as they would breathe as one. And developers love that because they can define sizes in one place in their code and reuse them everywhere. Also, if you are consistent and predictable in your interface, users will like it more without even knowing because it won't be hard for them to use your service. That sounds like a trifecta of wins here. By now you're asking yourself, what freaking math? It's not one formula that you need to know, it's flexible and you get to decide. It's like designer version of math, so not that hard, but still logical. So you can use one ratio, aka magic number, like 1.5, to calculate a scale. Font size times magic number equals profit. Easy, right? Lol, it's not that easy. Come on. Fonts have line heights. You need to consider that as well, of course. You can use the same number to calculate jumps in line height as well, or you can use some other number that fits in your design better. I use one ratio for font sizes, and when it comes to line height, I like to use two ratios. One for headings and another for body text. I put lower number for headings because they are bigger and a lot of space between paragraphs looks nasty. Good thing is we don't need to calculate these numbers ourselves. I mean, if you want, you can just multiply the value of the previous item with your magic number, but that's slow and yuck. Here is an example of a good website that does the work for you, and it's visual so you can better decide what fits your project. I would assume there are also some Figma plugins, didn't check, you can check it yourself. Now we have a set of font sizes along with their respective line height, but what do we call them in our design tool? You should create reusable styles, so you need good names, right? I would recommend to decide between semantic names, like heading 1, heading 2, body 2, link 2, and so on. Then functional names, like block title, block text, date tag, and so on. Or maybe t-shirt pattern, small, medium, large, XL, XXL, and so on. These are some of the ideas on how you can approach the naming, but I dare you to Google this topic a bit. You will be surprised with the amount of articles that tackle naming patterns. There are a bazillion of opinions. I suggest talking with developers because your styles should in the end have a connection with development setup. That way you can together decide on the naming patterns. By the way, you should see the show with naming colors. I hope you like this video. Hit subscribe to show me some love because I noticed in analytics over 80% of you didn't click subscribe, and that is sad. So click now, make a good deed for today. That's all folks, happy designing, Joski.